Good to have you on the show. All right, as an education expert, how worried are you about the future, or the current and future situation of education in Afghanistan?
I mean, of course, Afghanistan has had over 20 years of the most horrific conflict. The education system is absolutely destroyed, and it's going to take a huge global effort to try and rebuild the education system. This is more important than ever because Afghanistan is now facing the cusp of a complex peace process, and our argument and all the evidence shows that if you put education, quality education, especially for girls and women, at the heart of a complex peace process, it is much more likely that you will have a peaceful society and you'll move towards post-conflict recovery. I think the specific issues, the facts that you led with, are true of Afghanistan. State actors, state parties during the war in Afghanistan have been much more willing to use airstrikes on heavily populated civilian areas. That's caused the most massive structural damage to Afghan education system and killed huge amounts of students at schools or teachers. At the same time, non-state actors in Afghanistan have been willing to use explosive devices, more willing to use them in heavily populated civilian areas, which include schools, which include students going to school, which include teachers. So I think we're not surprised by these figures. And also, I think it's worth saying these figures are true of a global trend. And that's why Afghanistan today, this release of this case study by GCPA is a case study of a much wider global phenomenon that we see in countries ranging from Ukraine, which is in the heart of Europe, through to Syria and to Yemen. And I think the key takeaway is this is a global problem of attacks on education. It requires a global solution, and it requires concerted global action.
I agree on all the points that you make. You mentioned that this is a very critical moment in Afghanistan's education and the future of it. What's interesting to me is when the Taliban took over the capital and there was this mass exodus, those scenes of people trying to flee on evacuation flights, the Taliban came out and said, look, we want all able and qualified Afghans not to leave the country. We prefer for them to stay in the country. Isn't it a bit ironic that it all starts with education?
Yes, I mean, education is at the absolute heart of rebuilding peaceful, prosperous societies. And I think that's one of the tragedies in Afghanistan. Just as you needed an education system, you needed continuity of education to keep people qualified who would be in Afghanistan to rebuild it. The situation is that very many people, understandably, with their families have fled. They've sought refuge outside Afghanistan. I mean, this is going to be a process. You can't have the sort of 20 years of war, 20 years more of war in Afghanistan that we've seen and solve the problems overnight. I think that education, including girls' education, truly, properly should be at the heart of all attempts, and all parties within the peace process should make the education of girls and education more generally an absolute precondition. It should be one of the clauses within the peace treaties that are negotiated so that it's at the heart of rebuilding Afghanistan as a prosperous, peaceful society, which is what everyone wants.
Indeed. Maleiha Malik, fantastic talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on and for your analysis. Thank you.